December 20th, 1998. Inside the Palladium nightclub in downtown Vancouver, the bass was thumping, the lights were flashing, and the dance floor was packed with over 300 people moving to the rhythm. At 1:30 in the morning, a man in designer clothes stepped through the crowd, confident, unbothered, living like he was untouchable. His name was Bhupinder Bindy Johal, and in Vancouver's underworld, that name carried serious weight. But at 4:30 a.m., everything stopped. A figure moved through the crowd, stepped up behind Bindy, and fired a single shot to the back of his head at close range. He dropped instantly. The music kept playing for a second before someone noticed the body. Panic spread. People scattered. And when the police arrived, they found Bindy lying on the floor, blood pooling around his head, dead at 27 years old. Over 300 people were in that club, over 300 potential witnesses. But when detectives started asking questions, nobody saw nothing. Not one person could describe the shooter. Not one person wanted to talk, because even in death, Bindy Johal's name still made people nervous. For a man who'd built a drug empire, murdered his mentors, walked free from a murder trial, and became Vancouver's first celebrity gangster, this was how it ended. Shot from behind, surrounded by strangers, in the same kind of violence he dealt out for years. But the real question ain't how Bindy died. It's how he got there in the first place. How does a kid from Punjab, India, become the most feared gangster in Vancouver? How does a second-generation immigrant who faced racism and rejection turn that pain into power, money, and murder? That story don't start in a nightclub. It starts in East Vancouver, where immigrant families were chasing the Canadian dream, and some kids decided the only way to get respect was to take it by force. Bhupinder Singh Johal was born on January 14, 1971, in Shankar, a small village in Punjab, India. He came from a Jat Sikh family, part of the Johal clan, and for the first few years of his life, he lived in a world his parents were desperate to leave behind. India in the early 1970s was still recovering from partition, still dealing with poverty, and for families like the Johals, Canada represented hope, a fresh start, a chance to build something better. In 1975, when Bindy was just 4 years old, his family immigrated to Vancouver, British Columbia, settling in East Vancouver, a working-class neighborhood that was home to a growing South Asian community. His father worked long hours in a lumber mill, one of the few jobs available to Punjabi immigrants at the time. His mother, Balbir Kaur Johal, worked as a secretary, helping to keep the family afloat. They came to Canada looking for opportunity, for stability, for the kind of life their kids could be proud of. They never imagined their eldest son would become one of the most notorious criminals in the city's history. Bindy's parents separated when he was young, and he was raised primarily by his mother. From early on, teachers and neighbors noticed something different about him. He was temperamental, quick to anger, and didn't take well to discipline. One source later described him as a problem child, someone who struggled in school, not because he wasn't smart, but because he couldn't sit still, couldn't follow rules, and couldn't respect authority. When Bindy entered grade 8 at Sir Charles Tupper Secondary School in East Vancouver, a teacher named Rob Sandhu later recalled, when he came into grade 8, it didn't seem like he had any problems. But by the time Bindy hit high school, something had shifted. He wasn't the quiet immigrant kid trying to fit in anymore. He was angry, he was restless, and he was done being disrespected. Growing up in East Vancouver in the 1980s wasn't easy for South Asian kids. Racism was real. It was in the hallways, on the streets, in the way people looked at you. Bindy got called names, got into fights, and learned real quick that if you didn't stand up for yourself, people would walk all over you. One story that became part of his legend was how he stood up to racist bullies in high school, refusing to back down even when he was outnumbered. For a lot of immigrant kids who felt invisible, that made Bindy someone to look up to. But standing up to bullies was one thing. What came next was something else entirely. In grade 12, Bindy got into an argument with the school's vice principal. The details are murky, but what's clear is that the argument turned physical. Bindy assaulted the vice principal and he was expelled from school. He never graduated, and instead of straightening out, he dropped out completely and started running with a different crowd. Around this time in 1989, Bindy got locked up briefly for assault. It wasn't a long sentence, just 60 days in youth detention, but it changed everything. Inside, he met older guys who were already deep in the game. They taught him how the streets worked, how to move weight, how to collect debts, and most importantly, how to make money fast. When Bindy got out, he didn't go back to school. He went straight into the life. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Vancouver's gang scene was starting to shift. The city had always had organized crime, mostly biker gangs like the Hells Angels and Asian triads controlling the drug trade. But a new wave was coming up, and it was young, hungry, and predominantly Indo-Canadian. These weren't kids following traditional gang structures. They were building their own thing. And Bindy Johal was right in the middle of it. Bindy joined a gang called Los Diablos, which translates to the Devils. Originally, Los Diablos was a Hispanic gang that controlled parts of East Vancouver. But as more South Asian kids got involved, the gang's demographics shifted. By the early 1990s, Los Diablos was being run by two brothers, Jimmy Dosanjh and Ranjit Ron Dosanjh. They were older, more established, and deeply connected to Vancouver's cocaine trade. They also had ties to Colombian drug cartels, which gave them access to a product that other gangs couldn't touch. Bindy started working for the Dosanjh brothers as an enforcer and a hitman. His job was simple: collect debts, handle problems, and make sure people stayed in line. He was good at it, real good. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. If someone owed money and didn't pay, Bindy made sure they understood the consequences. If someone disrespected the Dosanjhs, Bindy made an example out of them. He built a reputation fast, not just as muscle, but as someone who was willing to go further than anyone else. At the same time, Bindy started selling cocaine on his own. He wasn't just working for the Dosanjhs anymore. He was building his own network, his own clientele, his own cash flow. And that's when things started getting complicated. Because in the drug game, loyalty only goes so far. And Bindy was starting to see opportunities that the Dosanjh brothers couldn't. On March 14th, 1991, a Colombian drug trafficker named Teodoro Salcedo was found dead in Vancouver. He'd been shot and dumped behind a rehab center. Jimmy Dosanjh was arrested and charged with the murder. The case went to trial, and while Jimmy was eventually acquitted due to lack of witness cooperation, he spent months in jail waiting for the verdict. And that's when Bindy made his move. With Jimmy locked up and Ron trying to hold things together on the outside, Bindy saw an opening. He started taking over their operations, recruiting their dealers, and cutting them out of deals. He wasn't asking permission. He was just taking what he thought he deserved. Bindy and his crew even began hijacking trucks carrying electronics and automobiles that landed at the port of Vancouver, selling the goods on the black market. A television documentary at the time estimated that Bindy had an annual income of $4 million. By the time Jimmy got out of jail in early 1994, Bindy had essentially stolen their empire out from under them. Jimmy Dosanjh was furious. He wasn't about to let some young upstart disrespect him like that. Word on the street was that Jimmy put out a contract on Bindy's life, reportedly offering over $230,000 to anyone who could take him out. Bindy heard about it, and instead of running, he decided to strike first. On February 25th, 1994, Jimmy Dosanjh was walking through an East Vancouver alley when a gunman stepped out and opened fire. Jimmy was hit multiple times and died on the spot. It was a brazen, cold-blooded execution, and everyone knew who was behind it. Even though no one could prove it, the streets knew. Bindy had just killed one of his former bosses. And here's the wild part. In one version of the story, Jimmy had actually sent a hitman to kill Bindy. But Bindy convinced that same hitman to turn on Jimmy instead. The audacity of that move alone made Bindy a legend. But Bindy didn't stop there. He went on television. In April 1994, CTV News invited Bindy Johal onto the evening broadcast to talk about the murder of Jimmy Dosanjh. It was one of the wildest moments in Canadian media history. A known gangster, the prime suspect in a murder, sitting in a television studio, dressed in a leather jacket, talking trash on live TV. When asked about the ongoing gang war, Bindy looked directly into the camera and said, "Basically, I just want these guys to know you got another thing coming, bitch. I'm still around." That line, "I'm still around," became his tagline. It was posted on flyers, repeated in the streets, and turned into a legend. Bindy wasn't hiding. He was flaunting it, and for a lot of young Indo-Canadian kids who felt powerless, who felt like society had written them off, Bindy represented something different. He was loud, he was fearless, he was breaking every rule. 2 weeks after that broadcast, on April 19th, 1994, Ron Dosanjh was sitting in his red GMC pickup truck at a traffic light on Kingsway Street in broad daylight. A stolen gray Ford Taurus pulled up alongside him. The window rolled down and a gunman opened fire with an AK-47 assault rifle. Ron was hit multiple times in the face and upper body. His truck veered wildly, jumped the curb, took out a payphone booth, and crashed into a tree. Ron Dosanjh was dead before the paramedics arrived. It was one of the most brazen shootings in Vancouver's history. Middle of the day, busy intersection, dozens of witnesses, and still nobody talked. Because by then, everyone knew. If you crossed Bindy Johal, you didn't just get hurt, you got erased. 5 days after Ron's murder, another shooting happened. A man named Glenn Olson was walking his dog in East Vancouver when he was gunned down in the street with an AK-47. 24 shell casings were found at the scene. Olson wasn't a gangster. He wasn't involved in the drug trade. He was Bindy's neighbor, and Bindy had asked him to dog sit for a few weeks while he laid low. The shooters thought they were killing Bindy. They got the wrong guy. At that point, Vancouver was in full panic mode. When dog walkers are getting gunned down and broadcasters are interviewing murderers on the evening news, your city's got a problem. Mayor Philip Owen put together a 150-man special task force to investigate the killings. Over $1 million was spent on the case. And on April 24, 1994, Bindy Johal was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in connection with the deaths of Jimmy and Ron Dosanjh. The trial began on February 27, 1995, and it was one of the longest, most expensive, and most complicated trials in British Columbia history. Bindy was charged alongside 5 co-defendants: Rajinder, Big Raj, Benji, Michael Kent Budai, Hosik, Phil Kim, Sun News Law, and Peter Gill, Bindy's brother-in-law. The Crown spent 5 months laying out their case, calling over 100 witnesses, and presenting mountains of wiretap evidence. But then something happened that nobody saw coming. A juror named Gillian Guess, a 40-year-old mother of 2 who worked as a victim assistance counselor for the RCMP, started having an affair with one of the defendants. Peter Gill was 32 years old, 8 years younger than Guess, and from the first day of jury selection, she was drawn to him. According to court testimony, they made eye contact. He followed her to lunch. They flirted outside the courtroom, and within weeks they were having sex. The relationship continued throughout the entire trial. They met at hotels, parked cars, anywhere they could find privacy. Guests' friends and family told her to either get off the jury or end the affair. She did neither, and when the jury went into deliberations, Guess was aggressive, confrontational, and determined to secure an acquittal. According to testimony from other jurors, she shut down anyone who disagreed with her, implied that voting guilty would make them racist, and refused to consider any evidence that pointed to guilt. On October 12, 1995, the jury delivered its verdict, not guilty on all counts for all 6 defendants. Bindy Johal walked out of that courtroom a free man, and the legend only grew, but the story didn't end there. A few weeks after the trial, Vancouver police spotted Gillian Guess and Peter Gill dancing together at a nightclub. They started investigating, placed wiretaps in her home, and recorded her admitting to the affair. In 1998, Guess was charged with obstruction of justice. She was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in prison, becoming the first juror in North America to face criminal charges for misconduct during a trial. Peter Gill was also convicted and sentenced to 6 years. The Crown appealed the acquittals, arguing that the verdict was tainted, but before a new trial could begin, Bindy Johal was dead. After the trial, Bindy didn't slow down. If anything, he got more reckless. He was making an estimated $500,000 to $900,000 a week from drug trafficking, truck hijackings, extortion, and murder for hire. He controlled a crew called the Elite, a 5-man Indo-Canadian death squad responsible for between 25 and 30 murders across Vancouver. He drove expensive cars, wore designer clothes, dated multiple women, and lived like he was invincible. That word, elite, keeps showing up because that's what Bindy called his hit squad. These weren't random thugs. They were trained killers who operated with military precision, and Bindy used them to eliminate anyone who got in his way. One of the first victims of the Elite was a man named Amarjeet Singh Deal, who was shot dead while leaving the Marpole Oak Ridge Community Center on January 19, 1997, after watching a hockey game. Deal was an associate of the Dosanjh brothers, and Bindy wanted to make sure all of the Dosanjh's allies were eliminated before they could try to avenge their bosses. On October 21, 1997, the Elite killed Gurinder Singh Kun Kun as he was leaving his home. Kun Kun had attended high school alongside Bindy and considered him a friend, but in a moment of paranoia, Bindy became convinced that Kun Kun was somehow involved in the Glenn Olson murder, the neighbor who'd been mistakenly killed back in 1994, so he ordered his death. That's how cold it was. Bindy would kill you over a suspicion, over a feeling, over nothing. On July 1st, 1998, Bindy had the Elite kill a man named Venus News McKenzie. The reason? McKenzie was a romantic rival. There was a woman who preferred McKenzie over Bindy, and that was enough. Bindy didn't just kill for business. He killed because his ego couldn't handle rejection. But inside his own crew, paranoia was building. Bindy had a pattern. He killed people close to him, associates, friends, even family. Constable Spencer, who investigated Bindy for years, later said, all he was concerned about was himself. He was very narcissistic in nature and had a general hatred of people. Bindy reportedly had antisocial personality disorder, which explained why he was so quick to turn on those closest to him. He didn't keep close friends. He didn't trust anyone, and the people around him started to notice. One of his closest lieutenants, Bal Buttar, later said, if I hadn't killed him, he would have got me. And Buttar wasn't being paranoid. He was being realistic. The turning point came in the summer of 1998. Bhupinder and some friends were out at a nightclub one night when a young criminal associate named Derek Shankar decided to phone Bindy and ask him to join them. Bindy said he was too tired to come out, so Shankar called him a baby, just joking around the way friends do. But Bindy didn't take it that way. At the end of the night, Bhupinder and the crew piled into his truck and drove home. When they arrived, Bindy was waiting for them. After spotting Shankar in the back seat, Bindy hopped into the truck and told Butter he wanted to go for a ride. They drove to a secluded spot in New Westminster, and Bindy told Butter to stop so he could get out and take a piss. As he left the vehicle, he dragged Shankar out with him. Bhupinder later told a reporter from the Vancouver Sun what happened next. All of a sudden, I hear a big noise, and I turn around and there's Derek Shankar going down. Bindy shot him. Shankar was lying on the ground, bleeding, trying to understand what just happened. And as he was waking up from the shock, Bindy shot him again. Derek Shankar was dead, over a joke, over calling Bindy a baby on the phone. Bhupinder was shaken. He later said, when Derek Shankar went down, Bindy's whole brigade went down. You know what I mean? He took down one of the best kids. He was a guy who was a party animal with us, but he was a legit kid. He never messed around. Butter never fully trusted Bindy again after that night. If Shankar could be murdered over an insult, then everyone was vulnerable, including Bhupinder himself. And those fears were confirmed just a few months later. On November 29, 1998, another one of Bindy's associates, a man named Roman Danny Mann, expressed the wish to leave the gang. Bindy punched him out in fury. Later that same night, Mann's body was found in an empty industrial lot in Burnaby with a single bullet through his head. When Bhupinder asked Bindy about the murder, Bindy just shrugged and said, "Blame it on the HA," meaning the Hells Angels. Then Bindy asked Bhupinder if he wanted to go to a nightclub with him, like nothing had happened. At that point, Bhupinder knew Bindy was out of control. He was killing his own people. And if Bhupinder didn't do something soon, he'd be next. One evening in early December 1998, these fears were confirmed. Bindy and Butter were driving to a nightclub in Surrey when Bindy made an illegal turn on Scott Road. The police noticed the traffic infraction and pulled the car over. Bindy began to panic. He produced a gun and pleaded with Bhupinder to tell the cops that the firearm was his. Possession of the weapon would have breached Bindy's probation, and he would have faced 8 or 9 months on remand. It struck Bhupinder as strange because Bindy had always been very careful not to carry firearms unless he planned on using them. And in that moment, Bhupinder realized Bindy was planning to murder him that night. That's why he had the gun. That's why he panicked when the cops pulled him over. Bhupinder took the gun and agreed to plead guilty. He didn't sacrifice his freedom out of loyalty. He did it because the incarceration would provide a perfect alibi for the murder that was about to take place. When Bindy was getting reckless, Bhupinder later said, "I took over the elite. I told them to get him. I gave them $20,000 and they got Bindy in a nightclub." In 1997, Bindy had also created another set of enemies. He kidnapped a teenager named Randy Chan, the younger brother of Raymond Chan, the leader of the Lotus Gang, an Asian organized crime group. Bindy held Randy hostage for over 56 hours, driving him around Vancouver, negotiating his release. When police learned about the kidnapping, they immediately deployed 70 officers to recover the missing teenager, fearing this dispute could set off a full-scale gang war. Eventually, Raymond Chan paid 5 kilograms of cocaine to get his brother back, and Bindy was arrested on a charge of unlawful confinement. "I'll beat this one for sure," he told TV cameras as he was loaded into a van for a court appearance. The kidnapping trial was set to commence within 2 months of his murder. If convicted, Bhupinder would have served up to 10 years, but the trial never happened. By late 1998, Bindy's world was closing in. At least 3 of his associates had been killed in the months leading up to December. The Lotus Gang reportedly put a $250,000 bounty on Bindy's head. People were scared, people were talking, and Bhupinder was terrified that he was next. So Butter made a decision. He later admitted that he paid $20,000 to members of their own crew, the Elite, to take Bindy out. The hit was set for December 20th, 1998 at the Palladium Nightclub. That night, Bindy walked into the club like he owned the place. He didn't bring his bodyguards with him, which was unusual. He danced, he drank, he laughed, and at 4:30 in the morning, someone he trusted walked up behind him and shot him in the back of the head. One shot, close range, right behind the right ear. Bindy Johal died 4 hours later at Vancouver General Hospital. He was 27 years old, and despite the hundreds of people in that club, nobody saw a thing. The code of silence was absolute. Bhupinder was never charged with Bindy's murder. While he was awaiting trial for the Randy Chan kidnapping, Bindy's death meant the case fell apart. In 2001, Bhupinder was shot twice in the head in a Vancouver hair salon, leaving him blind and quadriplegic. He lived until 2014, confined to a wheelchair, unable to see, unable to move. Before he died, he gave an interview admitting to ordering Bindy's hit. "If I hadn't killed him," Bhupinder said, "he would have got me." Bindy's funeral was massive. Thousands of people showed up, including gangsters, family members, community leaders, and kids who idolized him. His death didn't end the violence. If anything, it made things worse. The power vacuum he left behind sparked years of gang warfare across Vancouver, with Indo-Canadian gangs like the Independent Soldiers, the Red Scorpions, and the United Nations fighting for control. According to reports, as many as 165 men have lost their lives in gang wars in the Vancouver area since the 1990s. Bindy, Johal, and the Elite were behind at least 30 of those murders. The violence he started didn't stop when he died, it just spread. To this day, Bindy Johal's name still resonates in Vancouver. Some see him as a folk hero, a symbol of defiance against a system that marginalized South Asian immigrants. Others see him as a monster who glamorized violence and recruited a generation of kids into a life that ended in prison or death. Police officers have shown photos of Bindy's corpse to high school students, trying to scare them away from gang life. Deepa Mehta made a movie loosely based on his story called Bieber Boys in 2015. The film told the story of Jeet Johal, a flashy Indo-Canadian gangster whose crew of young criminals upset the pecking order of organized crime in Vancouver. During the press tour, Mehta was asked repeatedly if the film was based on Bindy. Her response, "Once and for all, Bieber Boys is not based on Bindy Johal's life." But everyone knew. The connections were too obvious. Rappers reference him, podcasts dissect him, and in Surrey and East Vancouver, if you ask anyone about Bindy, they'll tell you everything. Even Canada's current defense minister, Harjit Singh Sajjan, who attended the same high school as Bindy, has spoken about how he saw kids like Bindy drift onto troubled paths. Sajjan's biography mentions that as a teenager, he himself drifted onto a troubled path before choosing the military over gangs. Looking back, what made Bindy Johal different wasn't just his violence, it was his visibility. He was the first Indo-Canadian gangster to become a celebrity, to go on TV and taunt his enemies to turn crime into performance. He didn't operate in the shadows, he operated in the spotlight, and that made him both more dangerous and more influential. Cash He commanding officer of the 3rd Police District in Vancouver at the time, stated that it was really disappointing that someone as bright and intelligent as Bindy would turn to a life of crime. He added that young people who want to emulate gangsters like Bindy see the benefits of being a criminal, but they don't see the danger of putting their lives at risk. That's the thing about Bindy's legacy. It's complicated. For some, he represents resistance against racism and discrimination. For others, he represents the worst of what can happen when kids feel like they have no other options. Either way, his name still carries weight. So what do you call a man who built an empire on fear, who killed his mentors, who walked free from murder charges, and who died the same way he lived, shot from behind by someone he trusted? That's the question Vancouver's been asking since December 1998. And maybe the real lesson here isn't just about Bindy's rise or his fall. It's about the systems that failed immigrant kids, the racism that pushed them to the margins, and the cycle of violence that still hasn't stopped. Because Bindy Johal might be gone, but the world that created him, that's still around.